My wife told our entire circle of friends, at a dinner party I wasn't even invited to anymore, that she was leaving me because I'd never given her a comfortable life. This after 22 years of marriage, delivered with a dismissive little laugh that apparently got some sympathetic nods from people I'd known for decades. I didn't correct the story when it got back to me. I let her keep telling it. 2 weeks later, my attorney sent her the actual divorce settlement documentation, reflecting, in careful, itemized detail, exactly what our combined assets were actually worth, and exactly how much of that uncomfortable life she was about to lose access to. My name's Martin. My wife Diane and I had been married 22 years. I worked as a structural engineer for most of that time, and about 14 years ago, alongside 2 business partners, I co-founded a specialized engineering consulting firm focused on seismic retrofitting for commercial buildings. Unglamorous, technical work that doesn't come up naturally at dinner parties, but work that became, over a decade, genuinely lucrative as demand grew significantly following updated building codes across several states. Diane never worked outside the home during our marriage, by mutual agreement made early on when our 2 kids were young. I never treated that arrangement as a source of leverage or resentment. It was simply how we'd structured our life together, and I'd always felt it was a fair, reasonable division of labor for a marriage. What Diane didn't fully track over the years was the actual scale of what our firm had grown into. I handled our household finances personally, not out of secrecy exactly, but because Diane had never expressed much interest in the details, and I'd simply never made a habit of walking her through quarterly firm valuations or partnership buyout clauses over dinner. She knew we were comfortable. She didn't know precisely how comfortable, largely because she'd never asked with any real specificity. About 18 months before Diane left, she'd started working with a personal trainer named Blake at a boutique gym she'd joined, initially just for general fitness. Sessions became more frequent. Diane started mentioning Blake constantly in casual conversation, in a way that, looking back, I probably should have paid closer attention to sooner than I did. I want to be honest that I didn't suspect an affair specifically until fairly late in that 18-month window. What I noticed, more directly, was a growing dissatisfaction Diane seemed to be expressing about our life generally. Comments about how unambitious our lifestyle felt compared to some of Blake's other clients. References to vacations and homes belonging to people I'd never met. A general restlessness that I initially attributed to a fairly normal midlife reevaluation rather than anything specifically connected to Blake himself. The affair, once I confirmed it clearly through a combination of credit card statements and a conversation with a mutual friend who felt obligated to finally say something, had apparently been going on for almost 7 months by the time Diane formally told me she wanted a divorce. Diane moved out relatively quickly once she'd made her decision, into an apartment near Blake's gym. What surprised me more than the affair itself, honestly, was the narrative she began constructing publicly among our shared friend group in the weeks that followed. I heard about the specific dinner party from our daughter Rachel, who'd attended somewhat reluctantly at Diane's invitation. According to Rachel, Diane had told the assembled group, with a tone Rachel described as weirdly casual, that she was finally pursuing a life that actually feels comfortable and exciting, implying, without directly stating it, that our marriage had been financially and emotionally limiting in ways she'd apparently been quietly enduring for years. "He never really gave me a comfortable life," Rachel quoted her mother saying. "Not really. I just got used to settling. I want to be clear about something here. I wasn't angry about the affair itself in some explosive, dramatic way by that point. Affairs happen, marriages end. people grow apart. What genuinely surprised me was the specific narrative Diane chose to build around our financial reality, one that bore almost no resemblance to the life we'd actually built together over 2 decades. I met with my attorney, a sharp, methodical woman named Carol Ingram, who'd handled our firm's corporate matters for years to begin the formal divorce proceedings. Part of that process required a full accounting of marital assets, which meant, for the first time in our marriage, Diane's own divorce attorney would be reviewing documentation she herself had never taken the time to fully understand. The firm I'd co-founded 14 years earlier had grown into something considerably larger than casual dinner party conversation ever suggested. My partnership stake alone, conservatively valued through the buyout formula built into our original partnership agreement, was worth several $1,000,000. Add to that our primary residence, fully paid off years earlier, a rental property we'd purchased as an investment a decade prior that had appreciated substantially, and a retirement portfolio I'd been quietly, consistently building since our late 20s. And the full marital estate came to a figure considerably larger than settling for an uncomfortable life would suggest to any reasonable outside observer. Under state marital property law, Diane was entitled to a substantial equitable share of everything accumulated during our marriage, regardless of the affair or her own public narrative about our finances. I never once considered trying to hide assets or minimize her fair legal entitlement out of spite. That's not how I wanted to handle this, and frankly, it's not how the law would have allowed me to handle it even if I'd wanted to. What I did want, though, was for the actual numbers to speak clearly and specifically, in writing, directly contradicting the story she'd chosen to tell our friends. Carol prepared a comprehensive settlement proposal 2 weeks after Diane's attorney formally opened discovery, itemizing every asset in detail. The firm valuation, the properties, the retirement accounts, all laid out with specific dollar figures, rather than the vague impressions Diane had apparently been operating on throughout our marriage. The settlement reflected a fair, legally appropriate division under state guidelines, not punitive, not designed to shortchange Diane of what she was legitimately owed after 22 years of marriage, but precise in a way that made the actual scale of what she was walking away from impossible to spin into the uncomfortable life narrative any further. I heard, through Rachel again, that Diane's own reaction upon seeing the itemized firm valuation for the first time was somewhere between shock and visible embarrassment. Apparently, several of the friends who'd nodded sympathetically at that dinner party had, by then, also learned the actual figures through the general small-town grapevine that connects everyone in these situations eventually. Diane's attorney, to her credit, negotiated in good faith once the actual numbers were on the table, and we reached a fair settlement within about 2 months, a process that, notably, moved much faster and with far less contentiousness than either of us probably expected once we were both simply working from the same accurate information. Diane's relationship with Blake, from what Rachel has mentioned in passing, didn't survive terribly long past the divorce finalizing. I don't know the specifics, and honestly, it's not something I've asked about directly. Rachel did mention that Diane had stopped repeating the comfortable life narrative to mutual friends fairly quickly once the actual settlement figures became common knowledge, which I suppose is its own quiet form of correction. I don't harbor deep resentment toward Diane at this point, honestly. 22 years is a long marriage, and people change, sometimes in directions that no longer fit the life they originally built. What did bother me, and what I felt genuinely needed correcting, wasn't the divorce itself, but the specific false narrative attached to it. The implication that 2 decades of careful, consistent work somehow amounted to depriving someone of comfort they'd actually been benefiting from the entire time without fully realizing its scale. I've since remarried, quietly, to someone who was actually present for the unglamorous early years of building that firm from a converted garage office, with 2 partners and considerably more financial uncertainty than anyone eating at that dinner party ever imagined existed. She understands in a way Diane apparently never fully did, exactly what comfortable actually costs to build over decades rather than simply receive. I don't think Diane owes me an apology for the affair, or even for the divorce itself. People are entitled to leave marriages that no longer work for them. What she owed the situation, at minimum, was an accurate account of what she was actually leaving behind. And eventually, whether she said it out loud to anyone or not, the paperwork made that account considerably harder to misrepresent. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.